Good morning, everyone. It's good to see many of your faces. We hope that your day is off to a great start. Hopefully you're in the right spot. We are going to be hosting a webinar focused on social support networks for the next hour. So this is a continuation of our preparedness webinar series for older adults. We hosted a webinar this past Tuesday that focused on preparedness at home. And today is going to focus on social support networks. It's great if you're on camera. Just know that you will be showing up in our recording. So if that's good with you, keep your camera off. If you don't want to be in the recorded version, shut your camera and we will continue on. But my name is Alyssa Plumer, and I am with the FEMA Region 10's Individual and Community Preparedness Program. And my colleague Tanya Toribio and I are here. We're excited to present some information, and then we will spend the last half of the webinar with an awesome panel of people who will be sharing their expertise and experience when it comes to social support networks and how it can relate to disaster preparedness and making sure our community is as resilient as possible. And wherever you are on your preparedness journey, we're glad you're here today. Whether you're super prepared and have your emergency plan ready to go and all your supplies and kits ready, or if you haven't started that, that's okay. You're here now and that's what matters. And hopefully you'll feel more motivated and inspired regardless to get better prepared, regardless of where you are in your preparedness journey. So with that, some quick housekeepings. Please keep yourself muted unless you are speaking or presenting. You're welcome to keep your camera on if you'd like, but like I mentioned, you will be on the recorded version. If you do have questions throughout today's webinar, please put them in the chat and we'll make sure to address the questions as best as possible by the end of today's webinar. We will have time for Q&A, especially with the panel, and I'm really looking forward to that. It was a robust panel discussion this past Tuesday, and I'm sure it will be just as strong today. And we'll be sharing several resources and links throughout today's webinar, and those will be included in the chat. We'll also have a form that you can fill out if you'd like to receive follow-up information in an email, because we don't actually have your emails right now. So if you would like to share your email, we can email you the slides as well as additional resources after today's webinar. We'll also be sharing the PDF of this slideshow and as of a resource list within the chat box, and you'll need to download that if you want to keep it on file. So that will be later on, so stick around. So before we dive in, I just would like Tanya and myself to do a quick introduction so you know who will be presenting to you. So as I mentioned, my name is Alyssa Plumer. I've been at FEMA Region 10 for over 8 years now. I've been with the Individual and Community Preparedness Program for 3.5 to 4 years already. Time flies when you're having fun. It's been a really great opportunity. I love doing events like this, getting to engage and creatively reach people and hopefully sell preparedness, because not everyone is as excited about it as I am, which is a shame, but hopefully people are getting more excited as we do events like this. And as we know, there's so many different hazards that could potentially impact us, especially within Region 10. And so we just try to get the word out and make sure people are as informed as possible and remind everyone that we're in this together as a team and that you don't need to be too intimidated or scared about getting prepared, because it really can be a fun and engaging effort. So with that, oh, and I want to mention I was at the Red Cross before FEMA. I was with FEMA's training program for over 5 years before this program I'm currently in. And then I was at the Red Cross as an AmeriCorps member, which is similar to my colleague Tanya. So I'll hand it over to Tanya for a minute to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya Toribio. I am currently the Regional Preparedness Liaison with FEMA Region 10. And I have been in this role for about 7 or 8 months now. But previous to this, I actually worked with the Red Cross with their disaster response and worked as a program specialist with them for about 1.5 years. And before that was also an AmeriCorps member. So I definitely have a lot of experience in terms of response and then also preparedness. But thank you, Alyssa. Moving forward.
Great, thanks, Tanya. Sorry, it takes a minute to unmute myself. So for today's webinar, here's the different topics we'll be covering. We will have more time for today's panel than this past Tuesday, so that will be good. And I'll hand it back to Tanya to kick it off.
So starting off, I really want to start talking about and explaining what social support is. The best explanation is right there. It refers to those psychological and material resources provided by a social network to help individuals cope with stress. So especially during disasters, this can be a really stressful time, but the more social support networks you have in place and the more resources you have set up prior to a disaster, the less stress you're going to have to deal with at the end of the day. So the types of social support that someone may need could be physical or practical assistance. So maybe transportation or assistance with others or with chores. Resource and information sharing. So information on community resources, maybe if you need food delivered, things like that. Emotional and physiological assistance. So someone who listens to and encourages you. A lot of this can be in terms of like social isolation, making sure that people are checking in on you and your well-being. Attitude transmission. So someone who helps you laugh or see things more positively. Next slide. So who is part of your social network? So this can be anyone in your life that really brings like both joy and also assistance to you. It can be a spouse, it can be children, friends, nurses, community and support groups, social services, respite care, and many more. If it's someone that you think can help to support you, especially in a disaster, whether that be emotionally, physically, or even someone that, like a nurse that you do pay for, but also helps you to maintain your lifestyle. These are all things that you want to incorporate into your social support network when you think about those. So planning for disruption of services. When you're looking at your social support network, how does it impact your day-to-day? So if something were to happen, who would be the people that you would reach out to that would be able to support you? So do you have reliance on food or medication drop-off? Is that organization, or are those people going to be able to continue to do that? Transportation needs, will you be able to get where you need to go? Socialization, again, socialization may not seem like a top priority in terms of disaster, but it's really important to make sure that you feel like you can handle the situation and you can handle it with a support team behind you. And household tasks. Obviously, if you struggle or if you have mobility challenges or whatever happens in your household and you need help with that, you want to make sure that you have someone who can at least step in to assist. If maybe an organization can't do it during a disaster, or if the usual person can't do it during a disaster, those are things you need to look at and make sure that they're in place when a disaster does occur. So how could a disaster impact necessary services? So power outages. That's a huge deal. You may have all of your current, like all your needs met currently, but if a power outage were to happen and your medication needs to be refrigerated, who would be able to support you within your social support network in keeping that medication refrigerated or in whatever other manner you would need? Any roadblocks? So if there's a roadblock, is someone going to be able to deliver food to you? Is there going to be someone who, nearby who can help assist you in any of these things? Some of the local support organizations. So oftentimes if a disaster occurs, support organizations are either really impacted. So in case of like COVID, a lot of food pantries did have to close due to the staffing. And also, COVID was a pandemic. There's a pandemic. So these are things that you need to take into account when you're planning long-term and after a disaster. How will you be able to get your needs met, but also what other organizations can you rely on? And then supply chains may be impacted. So delivery services, again, food and gas prices. Do you have a budget that would allow you to go up? in case you had to pay for food to be delivered, or if you had to pay someone to drive you somewhere, things like that. So for some of the social support stories that I wanted to talk about, like I mentioned earlier, I was part of the Red Cross disaster services team for a long while. And so some of the successes that we saw and some of the failures, I do want to start with some of the failures. I think this is a pretty well-known story that during Hurricane Katrina, older adults were some of the most highly impacted population. The lack of aid and heat really exacerbated existing medical conditions and caused 60% of the deaths during that time. And that does seem to continue to happen, that after a disaster, obviously those who are most vulnerable are going to be the most impacted, but putting those like your evacuation plan into place, making sure that there's people who can get you evacuated or at least be able to shelter in place with you to make sure your needs are met is a huge step to being more resilient if a disaster were to come. For some of the successes, I think these are some great examples. During the pandemic, Alaska's Adult Protective Services became more involved within the tribal communities and supported with PPE distribution as well as health and wellness of the community. There are a couple of others in there, but I wanted to talk about a story from when I deployed after a disaster. I had deployed to North Carolina, and there was a family there who it was 3 older adults. And thankfully, they had all been renting at the time. And thankfully, their renter's insurance, they had made sure that it had flood insurance incorporated into it. With that option, they had someone who wasn't able to house them, but was able to evacuate them from their trailer home. And so they were able to stay at the Red Cross shelter for, I believe it had been open for a month. They were able to stay there while they were working through their insurance struggles. And eventually they actually ended up being rehomed into a different location. So it's amazing to be able to see that people who are prepared and people who know what services they have available to them, they knew that they had flood insurance. They knew what the process was going to be to get them out of their home. And by planning for that prior to the disaster, they were able to enact that immediately. And yes, it did take a little bit to work with their insurance, but at the end of the day, they were able to be rehomed. They were able to afford those expenses between the 3 of them, and eventually they were rehomed, and it was a really happy ending. And one of the biggest things that we talk about is a lot of people, once they have a disaster occur to them, so they lose their home, they lose their rental property, whatever the case may be, oftentimes if they aren't prepared for it, they never recover. And that's a really sad reality, but this is why we hold these preparedness meetings and all of these webinars. It's so important to make sure you're prepared for the next disaster. Alyssa, make it first next. Thank you. So I think this is Alyssa's slide.
Yes, thanks, Tanya. Okay, so in terms of knowing what to prepare for, we covered this a little more in depth on Tuesday, but it's really important to be informed and know your hazards and risks that could impact you. And since this is Region 10, we are focusing on some of the large Region 10 hazards, one being earthquakes. So there are fault lines throughout the Pacific Northwest, which many of us are familiar with. And the unique thing about earthquakes is they're no notice events. So we really need to know what to do because there's just no warning as to when an earthquake may occur. But luckily there has recently been the Shake Alert or Earthquake Early Warning app for Washington and Oregon that was recently released. So if your alerts are enabled on your phone, if you have a smartphone, should give you a few seconds worth of warning, which is awesome. That may not seem like a big deal, but it actually gives you enough notice to get to a safe space and to make sure you're ready before the ground stops shaking. All that to say is there is a very large fault line, the Cascadia Subduction Zone, which goes from Northern California to British Columbia. And it's overdue to shake, so it's important that we're prepared. And it can cause a lot of secondary disasters, including mass power outages, communication blackouts, tsunamis, compromised buildings, and safety concerns. So That's not to put that out there to scare you. It's just to stress the importance of why we do need to be prepared, because these things can happen without much notice. Of course, there's also severe weather. I know many of us are preparing for the heat wave coming to the Northwest this weekend. Actually, I have my basement ready to go to hang out down here. Whether it's extreme heat or cold, this can really exacerbate existing health conditions. And so it's important to think about our current medical concerns and how, that could be severely impacted due to different events, whether it's weather, earthquake, wildfire, landslide, you name it. With some events like wildfires and landslides, it's important to know what our evacuation plan is and to be ready to learn and hear the alerts from our local authorities on what to do. Also knowing alternative routes, and if we aren't able to drive ourselves, are our care providers or our transit support systems able to help us, and what's our backup plan in case they're not and we need to evacuate. And I will have another slide on that in a minute. And just remembering what health services and programs you're reliant on for a day-to-day basis and how those could be impacted and what your backup and contingency plans are because of that. And talking with your care providers ahead of time. It's all about being proactive and being an advocate for yourself and your loved ones and what your specific needs are. Also, downloading the FEMA app. This is a great resource. I know that one of our panelists, who you'll hear from momentarily, Brenda McCain, she recently felt an earthquake in Alaska, and her FEMA app actually alerted her about the earthquake, and it was pretty accurate and made sure she knew to contact her emergency contacts if needed. It also has a lot of tools and tips to basic preparedness. So I recommend downloading that if you have a smartphone and if you don't have it already. In terms of evacuating or sheltering in place, so depending on the emergency or disaster and what the local authorities are recommending, that'll determine whether you should evacuate or whether you should shelter in place. So given the current times with the pandemic, I know in the early days, there were stay-at-home orders or recommendations in many of the states when COVID-19 was just starting. And so, I mentioned this on Tuesday, but as we know, people were flooding the grocery stores, getting last-minute supplies, lots of toilet paper along with food and water. And many of us who were already prepared and had those supplies were less stressed. So it goes to show you never know when preparedness may kick in. Shelter in place may also be utilized during a chemical emergency and other situations like that. In terms of evacuations, I know many of our states, unfortunately, have been impacted by wildfires, also flooding, and different events that may cause or call for evacuation are just important to keep in mind. And be ready to listen to your local authorities, whether that's through the radio, online, through your TV, however you're able to get your local news. Make sure you have all your essential supplies ready to go, and that's why go bags are really important. And of course, COVID-19 has kind of impacted how evacuation and sheltering has gone. So it may not be your traditional shelters. If you do need to find a shelter, make sure you know what the latest updates and policies are on that. And it all goes back to staying informed with your local emergency management and health department. I won't dive into all of this. We covered most of this on Tuesday's webinar. And I believe Sam can drop a few links in the chat, but we did cover the basics of making an emergency plan, as well as what to include in your emergency kit and your go bag. There's all sorts of recommendations at ready.gov. So check that out if and when you have a chance. Also keeping in mind emergency finances, having cash on hand and emergency savings set aside really helps with recovery efforts. A care plan is a good idea, especially for any health and medical considerations or any special assistance you may have. There are templates, and we will be sharing the recording to last Tuesday's webinar, and there's some templates we refer to for care plans. And just there's so many resources out there. We've put together a resource list specific to the Region 10 states of Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. These are just a few of the resources that are on that list, and we'll be dropping that in the chat towards the end of this webinar. So definitely download that, and we'll also send it in a follow-up email. If you share your email, you'll get that sent as a PDF as well. And I really want to thank our state partners in all 4 of these states for their support and partnership, not just for this webinar, but on an ongoing basis. And I see in the chat that Sam did share the links for ready.gov on how to build a kit and how to make an emergency plan and different considerations there. And so if you can take a minute and click on this, actually, Sam, if you could put the link in the chat box for the Google Forms, that would be very helpful. We'd love to collect your email addresses if you want additional information. So take a minute to fill this out. There's not many questions. It should just take a minute or so. And we'll also be sharing this slide after our panel if you need more time. And we'll share the other links as well on where to get additional information. So I'll give it about 10 more seconds before I move on to our exciting panel portion. Okay, so now I have the pleasure of introducing these 5 women who will be presenting about their background and expertise when it comes to social support networks and how that connects to disaster preparedness. So let me just stop sharing my screen real fast, and I am going to spotlight our presenters. And Erin, I had actually shut your video before, so if you're able to turn it back on, let me ask you to start it. You should be prompted to share your video now. And bear with me as I spotlight everyone. I see you, Erin, hello. And Wendy and Brenda. Carla, there you are, and Teresa. Okay, I think we are ready to go. So thank you so much for joining us, 5 of you. I'm really looking forward to this. So before we dive into the questions, can each of you just take a minute to introduce yourself? A few of you were on Tuesday's webinar, but feel free to reintroduce yourself because it's always a good reminder. And how you kind of relate to this disaster preparedness discussion, or how your information can be tied into all of this, even if you don't specialize in emergency management. So I'm going to start with Wendy in the upper left, and then we'll go clockwise. So Wendy, just tell us about yourself. Oh, and you're muted. So make sure to unmute
There
yourself.
we go. Okay, got it. My name is Wendy Flick. I am a social worker by profession, been doing it about 20 years around the healthcare field. And specifically in the last 4 or 5 years have been home health. So going into people's homes and seeing all the different kinds of situations, lives that people have. And my connection to emergency management is that the director of emergency management for the Department of Human Services for Oregon is in his home office downstairs. So that's my training there, and have gotten to participate in some trainings with our local healthcare businesses for their emergency preparedness when the CMS came out with new rules and things about helping people become prepared and keeping our healthcare system running in a disaster. So I've gotten to participate in things like that. So that's me.
Great, thanks, Wendy. Okay, Erin, how about you?
Good morning, everybody. It is a beautiful day in Idaho. My name is Erin Olson, and I am pleased to be able to discuss how the Idaho Commission on Aging and the Aging and Disability Resource Center can assist aging people and people with disabilities and their communities to prepare for disasters and emergencies. I'm not directly involved with emergency preparedness, other than we really feel like everybody just always needs to be prepared. Ahead of time. You can't say I prepared if it wasn't ahead of time anyway. That's kind of an oxymoron. So what we promote are opportunities for people to learn what they need to know and the resources that are available that allow them to make informed decisions and choices as they age. And with that ability, we're all more eased with just continuing on with life as it is. And we are in many ways better prepared for those types of emergencies. So my personal background or story or tie is that I've been with Commission on Aging for almost 4 years now. Before that, I have done a variety of things, nursing, as well as IT. Don't try to figure out the connection there. And education is a big part of my life. But I also have a personal stake in preparedness because I am not only diabetic and I have multiple sclerosis, but I'm also blind. So when it comes to being prepared, I take it kind of seriously and want to be ready for those things. So that is what I plan on sharing with everybody. And I know that each of us is looking forward to sharing with all of you ways that you can be prepared and the resources you'll need to do so.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Erin. Okay, Brenda, your turn. Oh, sorry. Let me ask you to unmute. Okay, can you hold on? Okay, you should be good now. Sorry about that.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Hello, I'm Brenda McCain. I'm from Willow Community Emergency Response Team, Willow CERT, and I'm the program manager. We've had our team here for 6 years, and it's a very active team of more than 30 members in a rural area about 75 miles north of Anchorage. And my experience with emergency preparedness came when I moved to Willow, actually, and realized how we needed to be very prepared living here because of the area where we live. I'll talk more about that later, but I'm also a Red Cross Disaster Health Services nurse, and I work part-time from my home supporting public health and COVID response. We are in a rural, unincorporated area, as I said, 75 miles north of Anchorage, and it's a very busy area, recreational area, both summer and winter, with outside activities. So we have a lot of people here, but surprisingly, it is although there's limited community services here, it's a mecca for retirement. And so a lot of people that have lived in Anchorage for many years come here to retire, and or even from outside of Alaska. We have people on our team that one person lived in Florida for 30 years and decided after coming on vacation to retire here. So we have a strong retirement community here. I'm really proud to be part of this team, and we work really hard to train and help our community be more prepared. And we'll talk more about that later. So,
Wonderful. Thanks, Brenda. How about you, Teresa? Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Garrett Hill, and I'm happy to be with you today. My connection to emergency management is through our community emergency response team, as Brenda mentioned just a minute ago. I live in Lacey, Washington, in a 55+ community, and we have about 67 members here. We're about 60 miles south of Seattle and about 4 miles from our capital in Olympia, and we sit almost right on the Puget Sound area. So we have a lot of interest in disaster preparedness. And my former connections were part of a disaster medical assistance team for Region 10, and also currently work as part of our volunteer with our local county medical reserve corps as a nurse. and have been very active with COVID, as probably several of you on the panel have in the past. And so that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. And last but not least, Carla.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Carla Wright with the Aging and Disability Resource Center in Anchorage. And my connection to this is I've been with ADRC for about 10 years. And about 10 years ago, I was recruited to be involved with, we're located in the Anchorage Health Department. So we have an internal crisis program called CHAT. So if it's something like what we've experienced in the last over a year and a half now with COVID, internal crisis and getting connected to seniors and people with disabilities and ensuring that they have the correct information and being able to get connected as of recent of being able to get go and get their shots and get taken care of and getting connected. The ADRC didn't really skip a beat when we all started working remotely. We were able to continue doing our services and assisting people. And I'm very proud of that actually, because those are some of our most vulnerable folks. And during that time, there was a lot of isolation that we'll talk about later. Also, I'm involved with the Emergency Operations Center over there along in regards to the seniors and people with disabilities to ensure independent folks do have transportation in case we are they're isolated for reasons of disasters. Anchorage certainly a couple of years ago had a pretty good shaker, and even about a month or so ago, we had a pretty good shaker. And one of my positions that I really enjoy doing and have tried to continue doing virtually is educating agencies and departments on how to be prepared, but also going out to senior centers, assisted living facilities, and really encouraging people to take responsibility for themselves to be prepared, as well as the, if they had, presenting COOPs and explaining to businesses and agencies how to do COOPs in regards to having a plan, making sure it's current, making sure people know about them and knowing what their responsibilities are. And we partner with everybody in the state. There's 6 ADRCs in Alaska, but we do partner with a lot of the agencies to state, local, federal, profit, nonprofit to spread the word on how to be prepared. So we do access a lot of FEMA's information as far as list and how to be prepared and how to keep your items stored properly so that if you do need them, they're accessible. One short, quick thing was when we were experiencing the earthquake a couple of years ago, one of the facilities in Anchorage that was decided upon to be open as a short-term shelter for a facility for a place that had housed a number of people, but had a lot of water damage. It was discovered they weren't real accessible for people that had limitations due to mobility issues. So we were able to connect with some organizations really quickly and be able to get some accessible equipment in there. And so that was oops, we needed to think about this ahead of time, but fortunately teams were able to come together and get it resolved. And thank you for inviting me to be on the panel.
Thanks so much, Carla. And I think that really hits home the importance of these connections ahead of time, that we have these considerations and plans in place so that it's not a reaction and response based on an oops. So, I mean, lessons learned, but this is how we improve our processes and make sure they're as inclusive and accessible as possible. And we're in this all together. It takes all of us and all these different partners and organizations. So thanks for hitting on that. A few acronyms I want to define: COOP, continuity of operations, for people who may not be as familiar with that. So basically having those contingency plans in place for when a disaster or event does happen. How are you going to continue communicating with one another? And ADRC, is that the Aging and Disability Resource Center? I just want to make sure. Okay.
That is correct.
Okay, awesome. So thank you. I mean, as you all can tell out there, we have quite the panel of expertise. So if you feel so inclined, even though we haven't gone into the questions yet, feel free to do a reaction. We can, test out our reaction buttons. I'm going to do a celebratory reaction. It's fun to do these. Anyways, now we're going to get started with the questions. So the first one, and we're going to do this popcorn style. So I have a few people in mind for certain questions, but as I've mentioned to the panel already, if any of you feel inspired to jump in and expand or provide your own answer, please do. We have about 20 minutes. So the first question is, do you know of any promising practices at either the individual or community level that help people feel more connected and supported? So I am going to turn to Brenda for that first question. Oh, and you're muted. Easy mistake.
Okay. Because we are a rural unincorporated area, we do actually have pretty limited services here, but we also accomplish an amazing amount in spite of that. You know, our local, there is a very good clinic here that sees people on a sliding scale, and they provide a lot of community services too. And they started a van service years ago that has expanded, and so it takes people even into Wasilla, you know, which is 30 miles away, and takes people around locally to different events and to the food pantry. We have a wonderfully active food pantry. But one of the things, even though we don't have much for services in our town, it is a really very, very active community. And so I feel like that makes people feel very connected and supported. It's a very active volunteer community, even though there's no community agency, not much for community agencies providing services. And the most available volunteers, as is true all over the country, are seniors. And so for 60 years, like we've had a state winter carnival here, we have a brand new library being built because of volunteers raising money. We have our CERT team, we've got active Lions Club, we have a dog park that's amazing where a lot of the seniors gather with their dogs, and a community park. And all of these things have come about because of volunteer determination and work. And I feel that seniors that are active, and you know, in spite of disabilities they may have, in spite of limitations, that makes them feel more connected and supported. And even though we don't, and this year we've been particularly impacted, not just because of the pandemic closing things down, but because our community center is under construction. And so we got a double whammy of isolation because our senior exercise group got shut down, you know, so we really had a real problem. But seniors that stay active and volunteer can get more connected and develop networks even in an isolated area. And so that's I would strongly encourage people to do. Now, our team, our CERT team, tries to keep the community informed by Facebook and by posting things about educational opportunities through AARP. They do a lot of webinars, and through the Red Cross and through our local emergency services. And so just trying to connect people that way, even though we're not part of a town, you know, is what we do. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I see Erin's hand, but I just want to say one thing for those who aren't familiar with CERT, which is the Community Emergency Response Team. That is a community, local, like grassroots effort that is based off of the national FEMA curriculum. But the idea is that it's neighbors helping neighbors and being trained in an organized and standardized fashion on how to help each other after an emergency or disaster, because it may be some time until the official first responders can arrive on the scene. So the CERT training covers everything from fire safety to light search and rescue to disaster medical operations and team organization and so forth. So I just wanted to give a quick recap.
Sorry,
Oh no, that's
I assumed
okay.
too much that
No,
people
it's
had been here
fine.
yesterday. Yeah, and I really, that is, our CERT team is mostly seniors. You know, there's over 30 members in our team, and we've been active for 6 years now, and it's mostly seniors. And, you know, I'd mentioned yesterday, and I think I mentioned today, some people are in their 80s and they're actively involved. And that's, some people take CERT training to be part of a CERT team, and some people take it just so they can be more prepared in their homes, you know, and you can find out about a CERT team and taking CERT training by just typing in in your search box, find a cert, and you'll find the 20 closest ones to you within a 100-mile radius. And so I'd really encourage that. But for us, we're trained neighbors helping neighbors, and we also are called up by our emergency services and to support during disasters and after disasters. We helped with the COVID pop-up COVID testing sites outside safely in the community. And then we helped with the vaccine sites. And so it's just a wonderful, we've been very, very proud to donate hundreds of hours to those activities in COVID response. And so, and like I said, it's mostly seniors, and it's just become a great community within our community to be part of a CERT. And so I
Great,
strongly
thanks,
encourage that.
Brenda. Yeah, and that's CERT in case you want to Google it. And I know Teresa is also involved in CERT, and I'm sure she'll touch on that a bit when she speaks. But and it's all volunteer run, which is amazing. Erin, what would you like to add? I saw your hand.
I just wanted to say first that the CERT is fantastic, and everything you said is fantastic, but also reminded me, I live in Boise, which for Idaho is considered, the urban population center. For those of you from other states, it's a fairly small town. But it's interesting that we often think of people being isolated and lonely that live in rural communities. But like you were just saying, everybody in rural communities tends to know each other. And so therefore they can watch out for each other. It's often people in larger communities that are the loneliness. And one way that we chose to address that, and it will be an ongoing program even after the COVID crisis is over, is a simple friendly caller program. People that don't have a family member, a friend, or a neighbor get a call from our area agencies on aging just to check in, say, hey, how you doing? Is there anything you need? So volunteers are really the power behind so much that we can't do simply with the programs that are funded. So a couple of different options, but thank you for sharing that, Brenda.
I think you're right about that, because we do look out for each other.
Yeah, definitely good points. And Sam did put information in the chat box on where to find information about CERT if you're interested. Okay, anyone else want to answer that question before we move to the next one? Okay, moving on. Any takeaways or lessons learned from this past year and a half with the COVID-19 pandemic regarding the topic of social support? And I would like to turn to Teresa for that.
Thanks, Alyssa. So our example with our own community, as I mentioned earlier, we have about 67 CERT members, but those members are part of a more robust community emergencies response team. And our team we have a number of blocks. We have over 2,000 residents, and most of those residents are over 65 years old. And when we first started hearing about COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of fear and concern around the pandemic. And so we realized that as part of our CERT team and our larger community emergency response group, that we needed to get the word out and be able to help people find information that would help make them feel a little bit more secure in what they were doing to protect themselves. So directing them towards reliable and science-based information, and also connecting with them. And I think someone mentioned earlier that not everyone is technologically savvy. And so we really wanted to focus on ways to connect with people through our community chat, through the internet, sending emails, putting information in newsletters, but also calling people and connecting with them. We have a lot of residents who have varying degrees of abilities in terms of getting out and around, have medical conditions, were afraid to go out of the home. And so for those of us who could and felt comfortable, we could offer to run errands and those kind of things. And I think our connectedness through our CERT program and knowing our neighbors through our larger community response program really helped us have that trust and connection and that support already there for folks. And so there was comfort in reaching out for those who needed help and trusting those who were offering to help as well. And so I think that the key takeaways are primarily is to think about having, who are you going to call when your family can't get to you, to help with those types of things. And, if you need an errand run or you need a medication picked up, and just to identify 1 or 2 people and to start small and building that network that you feel that you can trust to be able to do some of those things for you, not just in the pandemic with COVID, but also, for any emergency. When the vaccines became available, that was another opportunity to get information out on where they could get vaccines, to help people get to the vaccine so they could be vaccinated, those kinds of things. So we really felt as our community emergency response team members, as well as our larger community, we were able to help during the COVID-19 ongoing pandemic, which we're hopefully is coming to an end.
Great, thanks, Teresa. So I know there's been a lot of mention of CERT, which is an awesome program, but even if you don't have a CERT in your community or you're not able to be involved in it, just get to know a neighbor or two. I feel like that close proximity, especially within the last year and a half, has really been key in so many ways, because it's great if you have your family and friends and loved ones as part of your support plan, but they may not be as accessible given the circumstances. And so this is a good opportunity and motivator, I think, to just go and meet a neighbor or two if you haven't already. Okay, anyone else want to expand on that question before we move to the next one? And if anyone, oh yes, Brenda.
I think that what you had mentioned at the beginning, well, first of all, I think it made everybody in the country think about preparedness. I mean, who would have thought we would ever run out of toilet paper nationwide, So I don't think anyone will run out of it again, But the point, one of the things you mentioned at the very beginning of the thing was having cash on hand. And I don't know about in the cities, but here right away, our credit union shut down and the ATM ran out of money. And so there was no money in town, so things like that you just wouldn't have thought of, and then people started thinking more about having food on hand. And yesterday it was mentioned that you don't have to buy freeze-dried food that you're never going to eat in your lifetime. Just start each time you're in the grocery store, stock up a little more, put a little more away of what you normally buy and rotate your food, so those kind of things people learned this year because we've never had that situation before. So I think this past year has been a good lesson in preparedness for us all. So.
Definitely. Okay, I see 2 hands. I'm first going to go to Carla and then Erin.
I just wanted to say a takeaway that we experienced in Anchorage was a lot of our seniors have congregate meals where they would go to different entities throughout Anchorage, and they would, meet on a daily basis. And not only was that something that had to be readjusted, but also that's part of a lot of folks' socialization. Mm-hmm. So that was greatly impacted as well. And, it got figured out. We started being able to, get folks their meals, but the social aspect of the socialization was something that the ADRC received a number of phone calls just because people were very fearful. And even with all the information that was being produced and just, trying to stay on top of what was going on with the pandemic and resources or services that may or may not be available, it was still a fearful time for a lot of people, and still is for a number of people because of the concerns of getting out into the communities. So that was a takeaway that we experienced and worked through with people.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. Erin, how about you? You had something to add?
Yeah, just quickly, because I know we have some more questions, but I think, again, building off of what everybody else has said, recently we've also become aware of the bigger picture, which is not just, for example, the credit union closed and they can't refill the ATMs, but what happens when the entire power structure goes down. Many of us don't think about We don't have a computer, so we don't have internet. So can we even find the phone numbers and things that we need? And so even though I've been spent 26 years in technology and I prefer electronic, I am moving back to ensuring that, you know, I have things in paper that can be used without batteries, power, devices, whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely good reminder. Thanks for that, Erin. Okay, the next question is, what is one of the biggest obstacles to seeking and maintaining social support networks? And how can we collectively help make it less of a challenge? And I am going to turn to Wendy for this one.
Well, I didn't know I was supposed to come up with the largest obstacle, but
Or a large one. That's fine.
One of the, just going into people's homes for the last 4 years, like I said, and then when the pandemic hit, transportation was a huge issue, because there were places folks needed to go, and there was the COVID testing and the vaccinations that they could not get. They wanted them and they couldn't get them because the community didn't provide transportation that was appropriate to their needs. I'm sitting there looking at empty buses, wondering why they're not out on the streets picking up our seniors who need to use walkers and wheelchairs, or bringing them to them. So those folks that cannot just get in their car or get in their neighbor's car and go somewhere, I think that was a big empty space that we left on that one. And to kind of piggyback on what other people were saying about the social isolation, that was the other thing I noticed, that, you know, the pandemic hit and our homebound seniors who are really isolated, they don't have a lot of family, they don't have any money, you know, and, you know, we lose volunteers. So Meals on Wheels was not as consistent as it was. They couldn't go to any of their congregate meal settings because they were closed. They couldn't see their caseworkers anymore. If they were tied in with the state or the county caseworkers, they didn't see them anymore because they wouldn't come into their home. So many things shut down. We added to isolate. Not only were they afraid to go because of catching the virus, but then we took things away that had been there for them in the first place. And I saw a lot of depression. We saw a lot of physical decline. Doctors were throwing home health, trying to get, you know, and that was their only socialization, was a physical therapist.
Mhm.
It was really disappointing.
Yeah, that sounds really challenging. Erin, I see your hand.
We experienced, of course, absolutely the same thing. I think everybody did. And one of the ways that we found, you know, that we needed to address it was actually to create some new programs, because like you said, not only were people not willing or able to go to places, but the places were closed. And even, you know, in-home services were limited because those people either could not or would not enter other people's homes. So you had, you know, kind of this double action that was happening. So what we did in Idaho is we actually created or allowed, I should say, a new service where people that were usually providing in-home services could get groceries and medications, bring them back to the person at their home, which relieves some of those transportation issues. And it wasn't used a lot, but it does become that lifeline. Like you said, if you can't get out of your home for whatever reason, and people aren't willing to or come into your home, you need to start, you know, looking at some of those services. I think we'll continue to see curbside pickup at the grocery store and things like that. But they're outcomes of what really became a crisis for people that were not able to travel where they needed to go.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing that. So I'm looking at the time. We only have 5 minutes left. Time sure flies, which is surprising. And there's also been some good conversation back and forth between participants in the chat. One comment I want to point out from Shelley in Oregon, a thought about cash reserves, because I know we spoke to cash earlier. One of Oregon's wildfire survivors lost a huge amount of life savings kept in their rental home without insurance protections. That's just a reminder that people should consider how they protect or limit any cash reserves. So thanks for pointing that out, Shelley. Okay, we have 2 more questions. We might just skip to the last one for the sake of time, because I think we've heard about a lot of ways people can stay socially connected before, during, and after disasters. So the last question is, are there any specific preparedness resources, programs, or opportunities you suggest people look into? And I know both Carla and Erin had a few points they wanted to touch on. So Carla, why don't you start?
Well, of course, I'm going to say the Aging and Disability Resource Center is certainly, throughout the nation and in your communities. And in Alaska, we don't have counties, but I know in the lower 48 there are counties or boroughs. And I would highly recommend connecting with those agencies as definitely one of your first places to find out information about resources or services in regards to whatever an individual or you're needing as a, provider or assistance with someone. There are a number of entities in, we're in Anchorage, so we do have more resources than, for instance, Brenda, who is out in Willow. But what I've discovered is the smaller communities have unbelievable support systems within their smaller communities. And so Anchorage does have more supports through agencies themselves, but some of the native corporations have some really great support systems for informing their individuals within their areas of the state as well. South Central Foundation is a big facility in Anchorage that educates and informs folks and is a really good support program for the Alaska Native community, working with all Alaska Natives, but they do have an elder program that has really come along. And I have to say that in the last 7 to 8 years, there's been a whole lot more of a focus, even with FEMA and throughout the emergency operations, on seniors and how to protect them. And so, of course, you've got FEMA and you've got the emergency operations, and you have the Anchorage Health Department who does the internal within the Anchorage Bowl area supports. But we do have a lot of entities. Some have been mentioned on the slideshows that you're going to be sending out to everybody. But I encourage you to contact your ADRCs. They're a great resource and definitely a beginning point to get that information for whatever support you're needing as far as emergency or any other resources. That's all I had to say about that.
No, that's really helpful information. So look into your ADRC wherever you live. Thanks, Carla. And Erin, any final comments from you?
Sure, absolutely. Reiterate your ADRC. Every state has a state unit on aging. It has different names. I work for Idaho Commission on Aging. They all have area agencies on aging, but those are your local resources that can connect you with things like transportation, nutrition, congregate meals, home delivered meals, a whole variety of things. And they are part of the ADRC. And then just, what we've 50 times already, it's called being prepared. So do it ahead of time and write things down, like your medications, your phone numbers, your communication plan, who can you call, your medical information, and anything else that you can think of, because you don't want to have to do that when a crisis occurs.
Great, thanks so much, Erin Olson. I almost just called you Olson.
That's okay.
Round of applause for our panel. Thank you so much. That was fabulous. I'm going to start sharing my screen. We have a minute left, I know. But that was wonderful. So much great information. And I just want you to know that we are going to drop the PDF to these slides in the chat in a minute. So look for that. And if you want this information, you could download it to your computer. This is some of the information from some of our panelists. So that is very helpful. With that, I would love you to take a minute to fill out the Google form. Stay tuned for the link in the chat, and there will be an opportunity for you to put your email address in there as well. So that will also email you both the presentation and the resource list and additional resources if you'd like to stay connected. There will be that question in there in the Google form. You don't have to get emails from us. It's not required. So we would love your feedback regardless. But please stay in touch. If you do want to get further connected with the resources in your state, we could always help facilitate that if you don't know where to go. And we have a handy dashboard, the Region 10 Individual and Community Preparedness Dashboard, that we also recommend you look into. So if you download this PowerPoint or if you request the follow-up email, you'll get the link to this, and Sam can also drop it in the chat. So I know we are over time now. We will stay on if anyone has follow-up questions they'd like to ask. Also peruse the chat because there's been some really good discussion in there. And I just thank you for being here. We plan on doing more events and outreach opportunities to further engage more older adults in getting better prepared and the support organizations that serve older adults. So we'd love ideas and feedback. Send it our way. And thank you for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. I'm going to stop recording, but I'll stay on to answer any follow-up questions anyone may have. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.